We're here at between Oberbaumbrücke and Osthafen at the river, and when you asked me where to meet, I wanted to be outside somewhere on this sunny day, because I'm working all the time inside. I just come from the university, I just come from a project in Cologne where I was working all the time in an office mostly. And this is a place of Berlin when I came here in '94, which has changed so much in the last years. And I still remember one of these older buildings where I'd seen a performance in the late 90s when this all was not restored and very different than at that time. The scene always refers to really the whole, the large group, and since it's so heterogeneous here in Berlin, what we see, it's difficult for me. I mean, the scene is always also the Greek word for to be seen, and the kind of visibility of artists and choreographers here in Berlin is so different. I mean, there are some people who are very much and very often seen and present their works also very professionally, and others who are not so good in that, and who do work for a long time, and who have done fantastic work over years, and their visibility is sometimes not this big, and this is also always a big problem in how is the distribution of this to be seen, and which depends not of the work, but probably of this kind of what we were talking about, the professionalization, about how presenting oneself in this whole framework of the scene, and about how you connect to other people, and if you connect to the right people, and so the community is also a work which is difficult. The whole community, I would not speak of that. That's so idealist and so in a way utopic. I would also think about this, what we were talking about the kind of architecture which is in there, not a kind of static architecture where there is some ground and the other thing which follow then on top, not a kind of hierarchical thing, but this kind of, perhaps they work both also very well together, the architecture and the ecology, because you're always talking about, you're including your surroundings also, and then the scene would also not be only be thinking of its own framework, and not only stay in its own conditions, and rethinking one's own methodologies and concerns again and again, but also thinking about the surrounding, how their work is connected to perhaps how this city changes, how things develop here in Berlin, but not only here, because that's perhaps sometimes a problem that this place Berlin is such a bubble which is so self-reflective. With Berlin you have an audience which is so highly educated, which is on a such high discursive level, and this is the level then, and it's very difficult also to propose different things and to be accepted with that, and and it's also in a way then artificial, because the community is only that, then it's only artists and intellectuals, it's only choreographers and their friends, so the social belonging is not changing so much. I mean, with other parts of the society, with really elderly people, with people who belong to different social classes, there's not so much connection finally. And the thing is that we have a very artificial level to talk about some things. We are all kind of migrants here in Berlin who came to the city, and finally it doesn't matter here in a way where you come from, but the social class is still the same, the intellectual class we are working in. It doesn't change so much where we come from then. Also, what kind of audience does it create? And if we still perpetuate something which is already in a way fixed, because we know what we are talking about, and I wouldn't say that there's no negotiation about this, but still some terms are pre-established in a way. There's some kind of things which are common sense, some kinds of discourses. Well, you still have some struggle about some minor issues in between, but so from that, it would be good to ask then what kind of mediation would there to make it accessible also to other people, to people who perhaps do not belong to that field, and otherwise also not to go then with the level up to zero, but to make this accessible, how to find ways, and that attaches then the question of what kinds of knowledge are we dealing with, especially in dance and choreography. How could we mediate this via also our bodies? How could we transfer the bodily knowledge and the discursive knowledge in a way that things become more graspable, that things become another density, that things also in history become more accessible, that we know how these questions really relate to us, and how do they touch us, and how do they touch questions of our daily life also, and not only of a very specific kind of inner discourse. This is what happens in education. How is it transmitted? How is this kind of knowledge, and thereby I do not only mean specific techniques, I do not mean somatics or other classes in Feldenkrais, and how do you build up a master's degree or a bachelor degree, but really who are the persons who are teaching there, who are the choreographers, what kind of modes of working, and not techniques or practices. How do I bring them together? Then also the mediation, which is in the field of, perhaps I would call it a way of, I use this word even if I do not like it, of this curating, working as a dramaturge, and then mediating it to an audience. I mean, as both, all the three are very closely connected, as I deal with how do I make things accessible, how do I also gain an audience first. It's a question of high responsibility, because it touches all this, what the artists are then fighting for, what they are doing. It's touching their work, and it's my responsibility also. I'm no production manager, but I'm not leading a house, and I'm not doing this kind of big work. It's only a small thing, but really working with somebody very, very closely. And not only the one person, like when I'm working with as a dramaturge with one choreographer, but also working in the field, seeing what kinds of needs and of questions are there, and bringing that back to the smaller piece, then to see what kinds of needs are there at the moment, and what kinds of should we bring outside to other people also, what could be necessary for them, and what could be important for them, what could make an accessibility not only for the field of choreography, but what could give them something they could use in there. To think about, they have to think about what the audience is, what we are working for. I mean, and to really make them aware of this situation they are in as perhaps coming artists in Berlin, or coming writers, or that's the thing we try to do, but also trying to do it together, because you can't teach it in a way, so you can live it with them in a way, if that happens. And it's really to make somebody aware, and it's a thing that you have to be aware yourself to be in a situation where you really make yourself clear, and that takes time also. I mean, that it's not a thing which comes up in 1 or 2 years. To make yourself, to always make yourself again aware, where am I now, and what has changed in the last years, what for me was good, what is not so good, in which situation am I when I'm working, in which situation am I when I'm writing about something else, what am I doing with that, and what I'm doing to the artists. So do I have enough exchange with the artists? But not only that, do I have also an exchange with how the artistic work is related to the society we live in, to the place we live in, and what does it mean beyond the dance scene? What does it mean beyond the artwork itself? There are certain categories I could use, but then the main thing is, I guess, to think, so why am I doing my work, and what I'm interested in working, and that's a process which is easier when we do it collectively, but finally also everybody has to do it for its own. I worked for the jury in Senate, and I work now for the jury in HKF. There are different criteria from the format already, and even if I perhaps partly don't defend them, but that's a different topic then I should work, or I try to work also to encourage people to work beyond that structure. So it's one thing. So there are these criteria which I cannot define. I also could say that we want to change some of them. But the criteria then are also the kind of what you just said. How does it refer to the specific art form? How did the people work in the past? And if they are new choreographers or emerging choreographers, how is the application written? So if we haven't seen so many pieces of a younger choreographer before, we have to rely on that. And how could we imagine also how a piece could work? It's not the discursive level, but also how it is described, how people relate to how they manage to build up an image of what they will do in the future with the project. And so it's a level also of being self-reflective, of also knowing how to create an image of something which could touch somebody else, for which somebody who doesn't see any dance in the jury, there are 5 other people who do not come from the field of dance, who say, wow, that I would be interested to look at this. And otherwise also, is it on a level, is it written that one could say this is also accessible beyond the field of choreography, and this is interesting for other people to watch. And still the point, why do you apply in the field of choreography, is also a question, I guess. Otherwise you could apply in interdisciplinary arts or whatever.
Do you struggle when you are in front of applications of people that you know? Do you also struggle because of this?
Yeah, sure, I do.
But you try to make a distance from the personal.
When I am deeply involved, I'm excluded from the decision, surely. And otherwise, I mean, you know a lot of people, but I mean, I also know all my students, and some of them I like. You always like people, or but that doesn't mean that you couldn't read text objectively and you couldn't see. And that's also good that you're there with others. You could discuss it. You could say also, what do you think of it? Because I'm perhaps a little bit too close to it, and so you could then relate also to what other people think of it. And you have a way of reading texts also beyond that, what you think of the work. And certainly it informs you what you have seen of other choreographers, if you have seen the work over years and years, and that's also a criterion. I mean, if people have worked here for years, it's also the question, who has had some funding, who hasn't yet got anything, and it's always a thing that we have all these young emerging artists, not only from HZT, we have all the people who come to Berlin, and also the people who change, because choreography and dance have become such an interesting topic the last years, such an interesting field, and all the visual artists want to work in the field of choreography. And so the situation is that there's more and more people come and want to get funding in that field, and then you have to decide. I mean, they're younger artists, they're older artists who have worked here for years and continue their life as an artist here, and other people who come in that field and who bring sometimes very interesting ideas to the field of choreography. And this is also important, and to make a decision in between all that different issues in choreography is difficult. But the pressure is quite high then there to make a career. Otherwise you can't do it in the academic field if you don't have a junior or a professorship. There are very few research projects you could work in, only for a few years, which is still a luxury compared to the project-based work in the dance scene. Certainly, how do we find the possibility to create other values beyond that format of application? Because that is the same thing then in the academic field. You have to have the same kind of differently, but also it's one application after the other for research, for position or something else. And the thing is that I see more and more people really being exhausted with the work while they're still very engaged in their work. And this kind of so-called immaterial labor, this creating, connecting, advertising, promoting yourself, and that kind that we are all loving what we are doing, which comes to that point that we don't have any kind of private life, perhaps sometimes, because our friends are all working in the same field, so you're always talking about your work also. It's this thing we love, but I see more and more people who have this kind of burnouts about and the kind of exhaustion, and how to deal with that, to really redefine how we work, how we create different value in that system that is not only a question in that dance system but much larger. If I have to do all that seemingly necessary things like connecting, socializing, promoting myself, which for most people I guess is not so easy, and for years also have been always very shy and the person who didn't say so much. And how do I start to think about what needs I have, and how could I then perhaps not in one step I couldn't change any situation, but small by small, by meeting and talking to my friends and the people I work with, and doing that perhaps first in a realm or in a space which is a little bit far from that big community, and perhaps thinking about ideas with people you're close to, and which always makes it easier. There is this interest in thinking about perhaps some fields would be the relations of really what choreography as movement, as my own body in a larger content, in a larger context means, and therefore also the relation to the architectural thing, to the surrounding. How does it my body relates to its surroundings? How do I also recreate it, and how do my movements change something, and how do I get in relation with my surrounding? I'm not somebody who could do that perhaps in a very large scale, but also you do it in this kind of education of talking to people, of being with people. I met an old Fluxus artist last week, Marie Bauermeister, and she said it, she's 82 years old, and she said it, you have to do it with a certain softness and you have to do it with a certain irony, and with a kind of humor, also not taking things too serious, your own things, but so that you still have a distance also. And that's perhaps also an important thing what for me was always important, to have some friends who are not at all dealing with the art scene, not at all dealing with the choreography, and sometimes meeting people who are not from the dance scene, not from the community. It's funny because there's this thing in theater studies that we always tell the students when they write their essays, to start from the things they see, because it's easier than to have a description and then come to your questions which come out of the artwork you've seen, and then perhaps to add some of the theories to deal with them and not to applicate them. And it's always the word application of a theory to a topic is always in a way difficult, and but but it mostly happens like this. What kind of part of a theory is perhaps not fitting, and why is it not fitting, and what is the point of rupture there, and it's the ruptures you're interested in, and then you could be step a little bit beyond the theory and develop something else out of it, not to have this hierarchy that the theory is something which leads your thinking in doing choreography. The discursive is on such a level that we sometimes have to be a little bit careful, perhaps, to look what it does to our way of thinking, not only, but to our way how to choreograph not only our pieces, but also the way of how we look at dance, how we look at our work in general. The ideal thing for me about thinking about writing dancing is always this, that one informs the other, that we should really, in a way, work much closer together in that field, that the one thing could inform the other, that things could emerge together, and not the thing of a critic who after the work writes about the work and has this external point of view. This different kind of criticality of working together, of thinking together what should be the measuring of also of what is choreography, why are we working in that field, how do we refer to it, and what are the conditions of it, and all that combined in our writing dancing.